This is the theater stage of Palm Beach Community College in Lake Worth, Florida. You're getting ready for a new production. I'm Monty Markham, class of 1955. A lot of performances have taken place on these boards and on the stage of the theater it replaced several years ago. And a lot of performers have entertained audiences out in those seats. But, without question, the greatest performer to ever walk this stage and thrill the audiences who eagerly fill these seats is the man for whom this theater is named, Watson B. Duncan III. It's still very hard to believe that 1991 ushered in the final curtain for this legendary teacher.
Notice what the monster Grendel does, though. He shows us what a monster he really is. What a strong, strong monster he is. Storming the building, he burst the portal. Though fastened of iron with fiendish strength, forced open the entrance in savage fury and rushed in rage o'er the shining floor.
He was called the Pied Piper of English literature, a star maker, the master teacher. And when he passed away, the world lost one of the truly great educators of our time. And I lost a deeply valued friend and mentor. Duncan was one of those rare, gifted humans who seemed to possess something more than the rest of us, something extra. Some would call it a kind of magic, and I would have to agree. Words were everything for Duncan. His soliloquies and readings of some of English literature's most memorable classics were inspired. He enabled us to see and feel the exotic power of Kubla Khan's pleasure domes and the intrigues and ecstasy of Xanadu, far beyond our inexperienced imaginations. For 43 years, the lectures he delivered to his students at Palm Beach Community College were flamboyant, animated, dramatic, and miraculously effective. Duncan's wonderfully pleasing and often booming voice ascended to the farthest reaches of the theater that bears his name. This was Duncan's last English literature textbook. It's got a lot of mileage on it. Contains many of his favorites, including Kubla Khan by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. That with music loud and long, I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice. And all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair. Weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread. For he on honeydew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise. And so he did, and lived life to the fullest. Duncan always said his first love was his wife, Honey, and his second, his passion for teaching. It was his theory that if he touched the life of only one student, then he was fulfilling his mission as a teacher. But for Duncan, the lives he touched were legion, numbers counted in thousands. And in these students, he instilled his love of literature and the written word through his own unique and forever memorable style of teaching. Duncan became, almost from the beginning, the kind of teacher every teacher would love to be. Any student who sat through even one of Duncan's dynamic classes will tell you they were never quite the same after. He was indeed a master teacher. But teaching was only a part of his legacy. Duncan's life was filled with a love of words. He taught the written word in his literature classes and in his unforgettable book reviews. He taught the spoken word as a speech teacher and drama club director. He served his colleagues as chair of the communications department and his community by establishing a scholarship fund for deserving students. Duncan was a man of intelligence, complexity, and intensity. But most of all, he was a man of passion, and with a wit that would do even Chaucer proud. In so many ways, he was larger than life. But like many extraordinary men, his story had ordinary beginnings. Watson Boone Duncan III was born on February 16, 1915, in Charleston, South Carolina, the son of Watson B. Duncan II and Herveline Spear. His grandfather, Watson B. Duncan, was an itinerant Methodist minister, as well as a scholar and author. He published 2 books on poets in the early 1900s, and as a lover of literature, was an early influence on his grandson. The family traveled widely in their religious ministry, and it's believed that Duncan took his first steps in Homestead, Florida. As a young boy, Duncan was known as Booney, and he would ride alongside his grandfather in a horse and buggy on the country back roads en route to the rural churches, listening to the old man as he recited the words of the poets and the stories of their lives. These early trips, filled with the telling of tales from the masters, had an electrifying effect on young Booney. Duncan's father was also a Methodist minister. It was the family's hope that young Booney would follow in the tradition and become the 3rd Methodist minister in the Duncan line. But as he could see firsthand, the life of a minister was difficult, and one that held no real interest for him. By early adolescence, Duncan was attending school at the Epworth Children's Home in Columbia, South Carolina. It was a church-oriented boarding school, and Duncan spent long periods away from his family. At Epworth, he earned his keep in the school print shop. As with many future men of letters, the print shop was an early exposure to the written word. It was in his early teens that Duncan determined his life's course. He would not become a minister as his father and grandfather. Rather, he decided to be a teacher of literature. It was sometime during these early years as a teacher that Duncan developed a love for one of Chaucer's most notable lines: "Gladly would he learn, and gladly teach." This line would follow Duncan through life and, ultimately, into death. In 1948, Duncan left South Carolina for South Florida. Founded in 1933, Palm Beach Junior College was the first public junior college in the state of Florida. By the end of World War II, PBJC classes were being held in the military barracks at Morrison Field, now the location of Palm Beach International Airport. Duncan's early classes became so popular, finding space became a dilemma.
In his classes, we had a serious problem all the time we were with him, is to find a place big enough to put him.
In class, we sort of cut up, and Mr. Duncan, we called him the 3rd because of his name, Watson B. Duncan III. The 3rd just let me know after class one day in a very loving, kind way that if I didn't straighten out, I would find myself out on the athletic field with slightly less than a D in his class. Consequently, we had a nice conversation, and I decided to settle down. We began to love him because we understood what he was doing, and I finally made the highest grade that I ever made in that class, a C. The very first day I became president, I said to him, "Mr. Duncan, do you remember when you threatened to throw me out of your class because I was cutting up a little?" And he said, "Eddie, I knew you would remember that, and I knew you would do something about it." And at that time, I kneeled down on one knee in order to show respect to the 3rd. And as I kneeled down, just as quick as a light, he placed his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Oh, rise, O sea student of yesteryear."
During class registration in his 2nd year of teaching at the college, Duncan looked up from his desk and saw a striking 18-year-old woman signing up for one of his classes. He would later tell friends he saw an inspired vision, and in his own poetic way was reminded of John Donne's The Bait. "Come live with me and be my love, and we will some new pleasure prove, of golden sands and crystal brooks, with silken lines and silver hooks." But she was not to be a fleeting specter in one of his classes, but rather she would become his wife and best friend. I'd like you to meet Honey Duncan. Hi.
Good morning.
Do you remember the first time you saw him?
Oh, like it was yesterday. I was registering for class, and it had only been a year since the college had moved from Palm Beach High. So I knew a lot of the teachers because they had doubled as the college teachers and high school teachers.
Oh.
And he was a different face. I didn't recognize him. But I do remember seeing him that morning.
So, what was your first date? Or?
Well, I was in his freshman English class, and there were 3 girls in the class, about 40 boys. And so the girls all had a good time in the class. But I asked him to the Sadie Hawkins dance that the college had every year. And he said, no, I don't think it would be very wise for us to do that. So we double dated. I dated a boy that lived in the dorm, and he was the dorm advisor. He lived there, too. And so as a courtesy, he would ask me to dance, and it just evolved from there.
Now settled into work that he loved and happily married, Duncan began creating a 40-year legacy of teaching excellence. This worn old lectern became one of his trademarks.
When we were first married and the college was in Lake Park, it was very small then, and he taught 5 different subjects. He had 5 preparations, and in addition to that, he had the Beachcomber. He was the sponsor of that, and the men's social club, the Fight or Die, and in those years he formed Firo Pi, but he was directing the plays, so he was out of the house almost every night. I worked, and I'd get home, we'd have dinner, and he was off to play rehearsal. And this went on for about 4 or 5 years like this. He thrived on it. He loved to be busy, always stay busy. He just made learning such a pleasure. Everyone looked forward to going to class. But then as the years went by, and I would hear from parents of students, and it seemed like so many of the kids wanted to go right home from school and repeat the lecture word for word to their parents and tell them all about it. And I just thought, well, that's something that's very special, that most teachers, you don't go home and quote them. And then, you know, he was always a great teacher to me.
For most of Duncan's students, it was their first in-depth exposure to the writers he taught. And for many, it was the beginning of a lifelong love affair with their words.
And Grendel stands there and licks his chops because he has vision of a 15-course meal. Many a warrior sealed in slumber and a host of kinsmen, his heart rejoiced. The savage monster was minded to sever lives from bodies ere break of day, to feast his fill of the flesh of men. Notice the alliteration there. To feast his fill of the flesh of men.
Duncan's enthusiasm for literature was infectious. He didn't simply read the tales. He lived them.
The Anglo-Saxons were gluttons. They would have orgies in their mead halls. They would bring in whole cows, whole sheep, whole pigs, and reach out and grab a leg of mutton, grab a leg of pig, and cow. And of course there would be bits and pieces everywhere and grease all over them.
He considered all the works his favorites, and many lectures were accompanied by chalkboard illustrations. Duncan took us on exquisite journeys. With him, we visited John Milton's version of heaven and hell in Paradise Lost. We picked daffodils and wandered in the clouds with Wordsworth. We swam the Hellespont with Byron, admired the beauty of a Grecian urn with Keats, watched Ariel soar on a romantic couplet with Alexander Pope, followed Samuel Johnson and James Boswell on their nightly visits to the taverns of 18th century London, and explored the secrets of Malahide Castle. We learned not only the words and their meanings, we learned the lives of their authors. Students hung on Duncan's every word, hastily scribbling notes on every bit of information, every favorite line, every choice bit of scandal and gossip. We learned to share his love of the literature, but maybe even more than the subject matter. We came to love the time we shared with him. With Duncan, every class became an adventure.
I try very hard to make the material come alive, to step out of those ponderous covers of that English literature textbook and the writers and the writings to come alive for the students. The main thing is the personal contact. To keep the interest of the students, you've got to hold the interest of the students to get your material across. And you simply cannot bore a class. That is the cardinal sin of instruction, is to bore a class. An instructor has no right to bore a class. And I try to make the material alive and interesting to them and get their attention and hold it.
Perhaps the writer whom Duncan loved best, and the one with whom he is most closely associated, was the bard, William Shakespeare. To Duncan and to thousands of his students, Shakespeare will forever after be referred to affectionately as the Big S. His passion for Shakespeare was universally acknowledged, and whether it was acting out one of Shakespeare's dramas or comedies, or interpreting one of the great bard's sonnets, or taking us back to an opening night at the Globe Theater to mingle with the groundlings, Duncan was always in peak form. He unabashedly loved the master and reveled in his words.
O God, Horatio, what a wounded name, things standing thus unknown shall live behind me. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story.
Perhaps it was his early success with his report on Julius Caesar that fanned the flames. Or maybe it was his own desire to emulate the world's greatest writer that led Duncan to devour everything he could find on Shakespeare. He even wore Shakespeare T-shirts to class and brought in a cake to celebrate Shakespeare's birthday.
This for you, Duncan?
I was at Florida State University, and I was on a football scholarship, and I got injured. And I came back to West Palm Beach to sort of recuperate and pick up some extra credits. And at that time, the junior college was at the Lake Park Fire Department and courthouse. And the only activity they had in the whole place was theater. And I wasn't interested in drama at all. I was in the back row, as all football players usually are, of English literature, and he was doing Byron, Shelley, and Keats, except that he was Byron, and he was Shelley, and he was Keats. He was an amazing actor. And I started moving closer down to the front of the room. By the time he got to Milton's Paradise Lost, I was hooked on English literature, and actually got an A in the class, and it opened a whole world of books, literature to me, that I become a rather ravenous reader, and it was because of Duncan. But one day he said to me after class, "Buddy, you're going to be an actor." And I said, "Mr. Duncan, you're a very smart man, but all the lights are not on in the building, and I'm not going to be an actor, and I have no intentions of being an actor." And he said, "Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, we're going to have readings for this play, and you'll be there in my office." And I said, "No, I won't." He was very, very patient, and I guess I did all right, because I won the the award that year for the best performance, and I got a scholarship to summer stock, and I was off to the races. And it was Duncan. He changed my life, and the direction of my life, my approach to life, my philosophy of life, my attitude about learning, my feeling towards the arts.
In addition to being a great teacher, Duncan was a leader and is credited with initiating many programs in the theater and in the community.
He had an awful lot of young people that he financed through Palm Beach Junior College. I don't know how many students over the years he brought to my attention for assistance, financial assistance, and how we worked together and did great things for students. Those students are all over the community.
In fact, no one really knows just how many students Duncan helped finance their college educations. However, it is known that he would often take money from his own pocket before he'd let a student miss the opportunity to enroll at the college. There were times when he underestimated his own talent and worth, and it took the friends who knew him best to sometimes make him realize his greatness was more than just a persona his students saw.
And the influence that he had on the thousands and thousands of students, I don't feel he really realized the tremendous impact he had on this college, my life, other lives.
How deeply I love Palm Beach Junior College. It's the only place I ever wanted to be. It's the only place where I have desired to teach. Not even the Shakespeare Institute at Stratford-upon-Avon. Not even Oxford or Cambridge.
No one who knew Duncan could ever forget him. He made us laugh. Lord, how he made us laugh. And he made us cry. He thrilled us. He filled us with wonder at the glory of the written word. He made us believe in ourselves. He encouraged us to be everything he knew we could be. For all he gave us, Duncan asked very little. Only that he be remembered and given a chance to learn and to teach. Good night, sweet prince.
Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more.